It's fascinating, isn't it? We like to think we're logical, carefully considering every angle. But the truth is, our brains often take shortcuts. And these shortcuts can lead us down some surprisingly twisty paths. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we, well, pull apart complex topics to give you the essential knowledge without making your head spin.
And what's really interesting, I think, is that these mental shortcuts aren't necessarily flaws. They're actually incredibly efficient ways our brains have evolved to navigate, a really complex world.
Yeah.
But like any shortcut, sometimes they lead us astray.
Exactly. And today, we're plunging into the groundbreaking work of Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Their research, it's just given us such profound insights into how we actually think, judge, and decide.
Yeah, really uncovering the hidden machinery behind our intuitive leaps and sometimes our not-so-rational choices. Their early work, that article Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases, that really laid the foundation.
Right, identifying those systematic errors.
Exactly. And then later, their focus shifted more towards decision-making under risk, which led to prospect theory.
And that really shook things up, especially in economics.
Oh, absolutely.
So your mission today, should you choose to accept it, is to gain a deeper understanding of these mental tools, the heuristics, the biases, and the predictable errors they can introduce.
We'll explore everything from those, instant gut feelings to the big life-altering decisions. We'll look at how we experience things versus how we remember them.
That's a fascinating distinction.
It is. And also that constant sort of tug of war between effortful reasoning and our mental autopilot.
The material we've dug into really highlights the speed, the power of our intuition.
Definitely.
But also the ways these built-in biases can, well, lead us to make choices that aren't always in our best interest.
Or even choices that don't really align with logic when you look closely.
Right, and how memory shapes our view of the past in some really surprising ways. Okay, so let's kick things off with a really fundamental concept. This idea that our brains operate using two very different modes of thought, often called System 1 and System 2.
Exactly. Think of it like having two distinct processing systems running in parallel.
Okay.
System 1 is the fast one. It's intuitive, often emotional. It's essentially our automatic pilot.
Right.
Operating effortlessly, without conscious control. It's what lets you instantly recognize a familiar face.
Or feel that sudden unease from a loud noise.
Precisely. And these rapid intuitive responses, they're often incredibly accurate. They have to be for us to navigate the world.
It's like a seasoned driver in traffic. Not consciously thinking about every single tiny move.
That's a good analogy. But then you have System 2.
Okay.
And System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical. It gets engaged when we tackle complex problems that need focused attention.
Like solving a difficult puzzle or doing mental math. Things that take effort.
Yes, exactly. And System 2 can also sort of monitor and sometimes override the initial impulses from System 1.
Ah, so it's like the supervisor.
In a way, yeah. And here's a key point. The feeling of ease or strain we experience during mental processing. They call it cognitive ease and cognitive strain. That has a significant impact on our judgments.
How so?
Well, when information feels easy to process, maybe it's familiar or presented very clearly, or it even rhymes.
It rhymes. Really?
Yeah, studies show that. When it feels easy, we process it with cognitive ease, and we're actually more likely to believe it's true.
Wow. It's almost like our brains equate fluency with truth.
Pretty much.
So a catchy slogan or a really slick ad might feel more credible just because it's easy on the brain.
That's the idea. But that feeling of ease can obviously be deceptive.
Right.
Conversely, when we experience cognitive strain, that feeling of mental effort.
Like reading blurry text.
Exactly like that. That strain signals to System 2 to get more involved, more analytical.
Okay.
It's as if our brain detects something that needs a closer look, more careful consideration. That strain can actually make you think more critically.
So while System 1 is the quick, efficient one, that feeling of cognitive strain can be a useful trigger.
Yeah, it prompts our more analytical System 2 to step in and scrutinize things. This interplay is constantly shaping our thoughts and judgments.
Okay, that makes sense. So System 1 relies on these quick shortcuts, these heuristics.
Exactly. Because it operates so quickly and automatically, it needs these mental shortcuts to make judgments fast.
And they're generally helpful, right? They let us make quick decisions with limited info.
Generally, yes. Extremely useful. But they can also lead to predictable errors, biases.
Okay, let's dive into some of those. Maybe start with the availability heuristic.
Good place to start. Availability heuristic. This is where we estimate how likely something is based on how easily examples of it come to mind.
Right. So the easier it is to recall instances, the more probable we think it is.
Precisely. Imagine you've just seen several news reports about, say, plane crashes.
Okay.
You might suddenly feel that flying is much riskier than driving, even though statistically, driving is generally more dangerous.
Because those vivid crash reports are just so easy to recall.
Exactly. The vividness, the recentness, makes them easily available in your memory, and that skews your perception of the risk.
So next time you find yourself worrying about some dramatic but rare event,
Yeah, ask yourself, is this worry driven by recent vivid news or by the actual statistical likelihood? It's important for rational decisions, like about insurance or personal safety.
And you mentioned there's a subtler side too, unexplained unavailability.
Yes, this is interesting. If you expect to easily recall examples of something, let's say examples of your own assertive behavior, but you struggle to actually list many, you might infer that you're actually not very assertive. The unexpected difficulty in retrieval itself becomes a piece of information.
Wow, okay. That's counterintuitive.
It can be. Now, another really influential shortcut is the representativeness heuristic.
Representativeness.
Okay, here we judge the probability of something by how much it resembles or represents a typical example or stereotype we hold in our minds.
Ah, the classic Linda problem illustrates this one, right?
Perfectly. You get a description of Linda concerned with social justice in college, etc. Then you're asked if it's more likely she's a bank teller or a feminist bank teller.
And most people pick feminist bank teller.
Right. Even though logically the category bank teller includes all feminist bank tellers, it has to be more probable.
But feminist bank teller just feels more representative of the description.
Exactly. Our mental image, our stereotype, makes it seem more plausible, even though it violates basic probability rules. That's the conjunction fallacy in action.
It's that immediate sense of similarity or fit that System 1 just grabs onto.
Yeah. Think about meeting someone quiet who loves reading. Your intuition might scream, librarian.
Right.
Even though there are vastly more salespeople out there, the stereotype of a librarian just fits the description better in our minds.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the anchoring effect? That one sounds powerful.
Oh, it is surprisingly powerful. This is a bias where simply considering a particular value for an unknown quantity, even a random number,
Can significantly influence your final estimate of that quantity.
How does that work in practice?
Well, the classic demo involves spinning a wheel of fortune in front of people.
Okay, a random number.
Totally random. Then they asked a question like, what percentage of African nations are in the UN? The number the wheel landed on, even though clearly irrelevant, acted as an anchor.
So people who saw a high number guessed a higher percentage.
Significantly higher, on average, than those who saw a low number. Their minds anchored to that initial random value.
Wow. And this happens in real life too, like negotiations.
All the time. The initial asking price for a car or a house, even if you know it's just a starting point.
It still pulls you.
It creates an anchor that tends to pull your final offer upwards or downwards, depending on the negotiation. It's like our minds grab onto that first number and don't adjust far enough away from it.
So even asking a leading question could act as an anchor.
Absolutely. Asking, was Gandhi older than 114 when he died? Will get you a much higher average guess than asking, was Gandhi older than 35? That's subtle. How do you resist it?
It's tough. One strategy is to actively focus on reasons why the anchor might be wrong. Deliberately think the opposite. Engage System 2 to search for counter-arguments. That can help reduce the pull.
Good tip. Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the law of small numbers. What's that about?
This describes our tendency to, believe that small samples will closely mirror the characteristics of the larger population they come from.
We expect small groups to be representative.
Exactly. We tend to see patterns and draw firm conclusions from limited data, even when the results might just be down to random chance, random variation.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about that study on kidney cancer rates across U.S. counties. They found the counties with the lowest rates were often rural, sparsely populated.
Okay, so people might jump to conclusions about clean air or healthy lifestyles.
Right. People started speculating about environmental factors, lifestyle. But here's the thing. Statistically, extreme outcomes, both very high and very low rates, are just much more likely to pop up in small populations purely due to chance.
Because a few unusual cases have a bigger impact on the average in a small group.
Precisely. A small number of cases can dramatically skew the rate in a small county. The highest rates were also often found in similar small rural counties.
So the pattern might just be statistical noise from small sample sizes.
Very often, yes. There's a great example from the Israeli Air Force during the Yom Kippur War. Some squadrons had higher casualty rates than others early on.
And the immediate reaction was,
And look for specific causes, training problems, tactical errors in those specific squadrons.
makes sense, you'd want to fix it.
Of course. And those factors could have played a role, but it's also statistically probable, almost inevitable, that with a small number of engagements, some squadrons would just have worse luck, purely by chance.
Attributing specific causes to what might just be random variation in a small sample that can lead you down the wrong path.
It really can. And this bias affects how we see research, too. A surprising result from a small study gets a lot of attention, but it might be more likely due to chance than a real effect. Yet, we often overestimate the odds it'll be replicated in a bigger study. System 1 loves a good story, a clear cause and effect narrative.
Even when the reality is just random fluctuations.
Sometimes, yes, it struggles with randomness.
Okay, so we've looked at these judgment heuristics. Now let's talk about actual decisions, especially when the outcome is uncertain. This is where prospect theory comes in.
Right. Tversky and Kahneman shifted focus from just judgment to decision-making under risk. And what they found really challenged traditional economic models.
How so?
They discovered that our intuitive preferences, how we actually choose between options involving risk, often deviate significantly from the assumptions of rational choice theory.
We aren't purely logical calculators of utility.
Far from it. One of the absolute core findings of prospect theory is loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
The basic idea is that the psychological pain of a loss is significantly greater, often estimated as about twice as powerful as the psychological pleasure of a gain of the same size.
Losing $100 hurts more than finding $100 feels good.
Exactly. That classic study with the coffee mugs really shows it.
Remind me of that one.
Sure. They gave mugs to half the participants. Those who got a mug valued it much higher. They demanded more money to sell it than the participants who didn't get a mug were willing to pay to buy one.
Because giving it up felt like a loss.
Precisely. Giving up something we feel we possess is more painful than acquiring something new is pleasurable, even if the objective value is identical. This pops up everywhere. Negotiations, finance.
And another key concept is framing effects.
Yes, framing. This demonstrates how the way information is presented, the way choices are framed, can drastically influence our decisions, even when the underlying options are objectively the same.
Like the Asian disease problem.
The classic example, you present a scenario about a disease outbreak and two possible programs to combat it. If you frame the outcomes in terms of lives saved, people tend to be risk-averse. They prefer the sure thing. But if you frame the exact same outcomes in terms of lives lost, people suddenly become risk-seeking. They prefer the gamble.
Even though the numbers are identical, just described differently.
Exactly. It's all about the reference point, saving lives versus losing lives. Describing an outcome as keeping 70% of your money feels way better than losing 30%, even if it's the same result.
And brain scans even have different activity depending on the frame.
They do. It highlights the emotional component. Framing taps into different emotional responses linked to gains versus losses.
It's fascinating that framing can sway our moral intuitions too.
Yes, our sense of fairness can be attached more to the description of a situation than the objective reality. Think about how people react differently to a tax surcharge versus a withholding discount, even if the net effect on their paycheck is the same.
Or framing something as a gain not taken versus an actual out-of-pocket loss.
Right. Even the format of probabilities matters. Telling someone there's a 10 out of 100 chance of a negative event can feel more alarming, more vivid.
Than just saying a 10% risk.
Even though they mean the same thing. The frequency format often evokes a stronger emotional reaction.
Okay, and what about narrow versus broad framing?
Ah, good point. This relates to whether we consider decisions in isolation, narrow framing, or as part of a larger set of outcomes or portfolio, broad framing.
So narrow framing makes us more sensitive to individual losses.
It tends to, yes. Each potential loss looms large. Broad framing, however, like how professional traders ideally view their portfolio, allows you to see individual losses as just part of a bigger picture, making it easier to take calculated risks for overall better long-term outcomes.
Is the disposition effect related to this? Selling winners too soon, holding losers too long?
Classic example of narrow framing and loss aversion in action. Investors hate realizing a loss, so they hold on to losing stocks hoping they'll recover.
While they're eager to lock in a gain. even a small one, on their winning stocks.
Exactly. It often leads to poorer overall returns.
And the fear of regret plays a role too.
Hugely. We often make choices to minimize the potential for future regret. This can lead us towards conventional options.
Like choosing a big brand name over a generic, even if the generic is cheaper and just as good.
Right. If the generic disappoints, you might regret not sticking with the trusted brand. Similarly, a doctor might stick to a standard treatment rather than try a potentially better but less proven one, partly to avoid the intense regret if the experimental approach fails.
And preference reversals. That sounds like we're just inconsistent.
Well, it shows our preferences aren't always stable and well-defined, as traditional economics assumed. Depending on whether we evaluate options separately, single evaluation or side-by-side joint evaluation, our choices can actually flip.
We might prefer option A when seen alone, but option B when compared directly to A.
Exactly. It further highlights how context and evaluation methods shape our choices. All these findings, loss aversion, framing, regret, inconsistent preferences, really form the core of prospect theory.
And it provides a much richer, more psychologically realistic model of decision-making than the purely rational models.
Definitely. It acknowledges how we actually make choices under uncertainty.
Okay, now let's shift focus to another really interesting distinction Kahneman makes. The difference between our experiencing self and our remembering self.
Yes, this is crucial. These two perspectives often value very different things.
So the experiencing self, that's moment to moment.
Right. It's the stream of consciousness, the sum of our feelings, positive and negative, as we live through an experience. Pain, pleasure, boredom, engagement, second by second.
And the remembering self.
The remembering self is the storyteller. It constructs narratives of our past experiences, evaluates them after the fact, and it's these narratives that heavily influence our overall judgments and, crucially, our future decisions.
And the remembering self often dominates, right?
Overwhelmingly so. It's the remembering self that decides whether an experience was good or bad overall, and whether we want to repeat it.
And it doesn't just average the moments. It uses shortcuts, too.
Absolutely. Two key ones are the peak end rule and duration neglect.
Peak end rule.
Yeah.
That's about the most intense moment and the end.
Exactly. The remembering self's evaluation is disproportionately weighted by the peak intensity, positive or negative, of the experience and how it ended.
So, a long, mildly unpleasant procedure might be remembered more favorably than a shorter one with a really sharp peak of pain near the end.
Precisely. Even if the total amount of pain experienced by the experiencing self was greater in the longer one, the remembering self focuses on those key moments.
And that leads to duration neglect.
Yes, the actual duration of the experience has a surprisingly small impact on the remembering self's overall evaluation. A vacation that was great for 1 week might be remembered almost as fondly as one that was equally great but lasted for 2 weeks.
That seems so counterintuitive. Surely longer enjoyment is better.
For the experiencing self, yes. But the remembering self, the one making the global judgment later, largely ignores duration. It's focused on the story, the highlights, the peak, and the end.
So when we think about our overall life satisfaction, are we tapping into the remembering self?
Mostly, yes. When you ask someone, how happy are you with your life overall, they generally consult their remembering self.
But even that judgment can be easily swayed. You mentioned the focusing illusion.
Right. The focusing illusion is our tendency to exaggerate the importance of whatever aspect of life we happen to be thinking about right now.
Like that study where asking students about their dating life, where before asking about overall happiness dramatically changed their happiness rating.
Exactly. Suddenly, dating success became the dominant factor in their overall life evaluation just because it was brought to mind. Or finding a dime right before being asked about happiness can temporarily boost reported life satisfaction.
We focus on what's salient at the moment and overestimate its real impact.
We do. Which is why trying to measure experience well-being, asking people about their feelings throughout the day is also important.
And what does that research show?
It often highlights different drivers of happiness. Things like social connection, time spent with loved ones, physical health, active engagement. These tend to correlate strongly with positive moment-to-moment feelings. Sometimes more so than the big life circumstances our remembering self might focus on, like income level above a certain point.
So there's this disconnect between the two selves.
The definite disconnect, and it impacts our choices. We might choose experiences based on the memories we expect them to create. Even if those experiences aren't necessarily the most pleasant moment to moment, we're curating the story of our lives for the remembering self.
sometimes at the expense of the experiencing self.
It seems that way sometimes, yes.
Okay, turning towards the future now. Predicting it seems incredibly difficult. Let's talk about that and the illusion of skill.
Yes, predicting the future is notoriously hard, yet we often feel like we understand things better in retrospect. That's hindsight bias.
The I knew it all along feeling after something happens.
Exactly. It makes events seem more predictable than they actually were, which can distort our learning from the past.
And related to that is outcome bias.
Right. Judging of the quality of a decision based purely on its outcome, rather than on the quality of the decision process and the information available at the time.
A good process can lead to a bad outcome just through bad luck.
And a terrible decision can sometimes get lucky. But we tend to praise the lucky fool and blame the unlucky expert.
Which makes it hard to evaluate decision-making skill properly.
Very hard. And this leads into the illusion of skill, which is especially common in areas like stock picking or political forecasting.
People feel they have expertise, even when evidence suggests otherwise.
Precisely. Despite tons of evidence showing how hard it is to consistently beat the market averages, many investors, amateurs, and professionals alike believe they have the skill to do it.
Why is that illusion so persistent?
Well, System 1 is great at creating coherent stories. We see patterns, we feel, we understand the underlying forces, we put effort into analysis, and we mistake that feeling of understanding and effort for genuine predictability. Overconfidence is a powerful bias.
And often, statistical algorithms actually outperform human experts in prediction tasks.
In many domains, yes. From medical diagnoses to loan applications. Simple algorithms using a few key variables are often more accurate than intuitive expert judgments, which can be noisy and inconsistent.
So is there a better way to forecast? Kahneman talks about the outside view.
Yes, the outside view is a really valuable corrective. Instead of focusing only on the unique details of your specific project or situation, the inside view, which is our natural tendency, the outside view forces you to look at the statistics of similar past cases. What happened when others tried to do the same thing? What was the average outcome? What was the range of outcomes?
It grounds your forecast in base rates and historical data.
Exactly. It's a powerful antidote to the planning fallacy, our tendency to be overly optimistic and underestimate the time, costs, and risks involved in future projects.
We all fall prey to the planning fallacy.
Oh, constantly. And related to that is the general optimistic bias.
We tend to think good things are more likely to happen to us and bad things less likely.
Generally, yes. We overestimate our positive qualities, our control over events, and underestimate our vulnerability to risks compared to others. A degree of optimism is healthy. It fuels action.
But too much can lead to underestimating risks and making foolish choices.
Absolutely.
So all these insights into our biases and mental shortcuts, have they led to practical applications? You mentioned nudges earlier.
Yes, the insights from behavioral economics and psychology have directly led to the concept of nudges and choice architecture.
Nudges. These are subtle changes to how choices are presented.
Right. They guide people towards better decisions, often decisions they would probably make anyway if they had unlimited time and attention, but without forbidding any options or significantly changing economic incentives. It's often called libertarian paternalism.
Libertarian because choice isn't restricted. Paternalism because it aims to help people achieve better outcomes.
Exactly. Setting retirement savings plans as the default option is a classic nudge. People can opt out, but leveraging inertia and the power of the default dramatically increases participation rates.
And choice architecture is the brighter idea.
Yes, it's about consciously designing the environments in which people make decisions. By understanding psychological principles like defaults, framing, salience, you can structure choices to make it easier for people to select options that align with their long-term well-being. Think about how food is arranged in a cafeteria.
Putting healthier options at eye level. That's choice architecture.
Precisely. Using these psychological insights to gently steer behavior in beneficial directions.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's quickly summarize the key insights we've pulled out.
Sure. I think a major one is just the pervasive influence of that fast, intuitive System 1 and its reliance on heuristics.
Right, shortcuts like availability and representativeness that are efficient but can lead us astray.
And the systematic biases that result, like anchoring, loss aversion, overconfidence, hindsight bias, they really skew our judgments and decisions in predictable ways.
We also looked at prospect theory, showing how our responses to potential gains and losses aren't purely rational. and how framing matters enormously.
And that fascinating distinction between the experiencing self, living life moment by moment, and the remembering self, telling the story afterwards, often neglecting duration and focusing on peaks and ends.
Which challenges how we even think about happiness and well-being.
Definitely. Then there were the difficulties of prediction, the illusion of skill, and the value of taking that outside view.
And finally, the potential of nudges and thoughtful choice architecture to help us navigate our own biases. Ultimately, it seems these cognitive shortcuts and biases aren't really flaws to be eliminated, are they?
No, not at all. They seem to be fundamental features of how our minds evolved to cope with complexity, to make quick judgments and decisions efficiently.
So understanding them is the crucial first step towards greater self-awareness, maybe towards making slightly more informed, deliberate decisions when it really counts.
Absolutely. And that brings up an important point, perhaps something for you, the listener, to think about.
Yeah.
Consider a significant decision you made recently, maybe a purchase, a career move, even a judgment about a person or situation.
Okay.
Reflect on it. Can you spot any of these biases potentially at play? Might availability or anchoring or maybe loss aversion have subtly nudged your thinking, perhaps without you even realizing it at the time?
That's a challenging thought. How might knowing about these concepts change how you approach the next big decision?
It's worth pondering. How might you apply these insights in your own life, personal or professional?
We really encourage you to keep exploring these ideas. Think about how these cognitive principles show up in current events, or in the choices you see people around you making.
Or even just observing your own mind at work. There's a whole fascinating landscape of these mental quirks and shortcuts out